So the consultation's over and the patient has left. They've had their treatment now, and it's time to consider asking for referrals. Now, after the treatment, usually patients require a couple of weeks to get adjusted to any kind of treatment that you do for them. What you want to do is you want to ask for referrals around the time where they are really starting to enjoy the benefits and things have stabilized to such an extent that they feel like they are really, really beginning to understand why they did this, and they're starting to take the advantage of some of the activities that they might not have been able to do before, now that they have their result. Now, importantly, as I said before, one shouldn't wait too long before asking for referrals because people tend to adapt to their new circumstances fairly predictably. And what was once very new and exciting and what one could have enthusiasm over becomes less so once the shine has worn off. And so typically a space of time between 1 month and 3 months is usually a good amount of time at which if you have somebody with a good result, then it's a really good idea to ask for referrals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest to you how to do that now. Essentially what we're looking for is we're looking for the person who created that either that initial bond of discovery with the patient or the consultant or surgeon themselves to actually ask for that referral. Essentially what we're after is to decide on one or the other based on how much of a relationship you believe that the person has made. Clearly, if you have somebody who's really good at making relationships and who you've given plenty of time to be able to make these relationships at the discovery sessions, then that's a perfect person to be the one who's asking for referrals at around 1 month after the procedure. If, however, you haven't given that person too much time to do discoveries, or that person perhaps isn't as good as creating relationships as perhaps the practitioner is, then you'll want to have the practitioner asking for referrals. But generally speaking, the steps are the same. There are 3 steps in asking for referrals. Number 1, we need to take their temperature. We need to understand how they feel about us and whether there's anything that might prevent them from giving us a referral. Number 2, we need to investigate further if there's any potential issues that we need to address. This is also, one can consider a way of checking in with people afterwards to see whether or not what you did for them was in fact well received, or if there's any niggles or problems that might need to be raised that haven't yet been raised. You have to remember that people are very polite and that people don't like confrontation. And so if it's an issue that perhaps is bothering them, they might not necessarily raise it, in which case you have somebody who isn't entirely happy with what you've done, which really isn't a place where you want to be. You want your patients to be happy, and not just happy, but also telling their friends and family about how great and remarkable you are. Number 3 is to provide them with opportunities to refer their friends and families. And there's a number of different ways that we can suggest doing that, either through person-to-person events or even social media. So let's get into this. We begin with step number 1 by assessing their temperature, by trying to understand where they are on a 10-point scale. Now, there's a scale known as the Net Promoter Scale that has been researched to see, it's been one of the many questions on many customers' satisfaction surveys. And that question has been the one that's risen to the surface to demonstrate that in fact there's more correlation between business growth and the answer to this question. So in other words, a business that has more net promoters or more people scoring high on this rank actually ends up growing faster than businesses that score lower on this rank. And that's really important because a lot of you will be handing out patient surveys or customer satisfaction surveys, and you'll have perhaps 10 to 20 questions on these surveys, and many of them in fact can be educational in the sense that they can teach you a little bit about what you've been doing and what you've been doing right and what you've been doing wrong, but very few of them have predictive value. And this particular question has predictive value. In other words, the more that you're actually doing better on this question, the better chances are that your customers are promoting your business and therefore giving you some of the best advertising you can possibly imagine, which is word of mouth. So what we're after really is to give them an opportunity to rate you on this scale. You can see the scale on your screen now. Essentially, it's a scale of 0 to 10, which asks one simple question. How likely would you be to recommend us to a friend or family member or colleague? And what we want the person to answer is on this scale of 0 to 10. If the person answers between 0 to 6, then we can assume that they're detractors. Yeah? It doesn't mean necessarily that they were mildly satisfied with the solution. Rather, they're in fact potentially out there saying negative things about you when someone asks them about the particular product. Passives, on the other hand, will rank 7 to 8. And what this means is that those people aren't necessarily invested in you and don't have a great relationship with you, and they might not be overly wowed by what you've done for them. So they passively will refer your name if asked, but they won't make any effort to go about promoting you. People who score you on a 9 to 10, however, they're extremely likely to promote you. Just as they would answer the question, are they extremely likely to recommend you to a friend, family member, or colleague? And sometimes they don't even have to be asked. Do you know anybody who does this procedure? Can you recommend? Rather, they're the type who, in fact, would go out of their way to tell other people about the service that they had with you and the experiences that they enjoyed and the effects of that experience with others without even being solicited for a request. So they're exactly the kind of people who you want to get more of. And you want to take passives and turn them into promoters, and you want to take detractors and turn them at least into passives. But before you do that, you have to understand who you have in your mix. You can see an equation on the screen right now that basically gives you your net promoter score. What this is that the percentage of promoters, those people that gave you 9s and 10s, you take that number and you minus the percentage of detractors, those people that gave you 0s and 6s, and that ends up being your net promoter score. Now, the interesting thing about net promoter score is that, in fact, many organizations use this same score in order to evaluate how loyal their customers are and how many detractors and promoters they have. And the interesting thing about this is that many businesses publish their net promoter scores on the internet and in different journals and other places where customer feedback is looked at. And you can therefore compare how you're doing against other organizations that might be also using this net promoter score system. The other great benefit of using a system like this is that it's only one question. If you supply people with surveys that have 10 to 15 questions, like I said, they might be very educational for you in order to understand what you're doing right and wrong, but it's unlikely that you'll get too many people answering those surveys, especially if you mail them or email them and don't expect people to fill them out right there when they're on the spot with you. This question makes it very easy. All you need to do is send one question out, and really people will most often be able to answer that question if it takes them 1 or 2 minutes to do so, probably even less. Now, beyond the net promoter score itself, the actual number, what we have to do is, it's ideal to ask people, well, if it was a 0 to 6, then what was the problem? What exactly do we need to do differently in order to improve that? Clearly, you wouldn't ask that of everybody, but you simply can ask that to people who gave you a 0 to 6. So if there's a way that you can structure your survey that you can have conditional logic, where if somebody gives you a 0 to 6, you can direct them to another question that says, what was the problem that inspired you to give us a 0 to 6, then that way you can actually just ask the people who have problems to share them with you. Of course, a human being can do this very easily as well. Again, on a survey, if somebody gives you a 7 to 8, then I would ask the person, well, what would have made it a 9 or 10? What was missing in that experience? What could we have done better? And again, then, you're only asking people who gave you 7s and 8s in order to understand what would make it a 9 or 10. You don't ask everybody else that question. And if somebody gives you a 9 or 10, then you want to ask, what did we do right so we can keep doing it? Clearly, there are things that people feel you did so well that they're happy to give you a 9 and 10. And often these are not only people who will recommend you to their friends and family and colleagues, but they're also the people who are happy to write testimonials for you. And these are exactly the kind of people you want to focus on in order to give you those testimonials, because testimonials are a really great way to use third-party stories to help invite other people to trust you and to listen to you, especially when they haven't invested anything in your clinic apart from perhaps just a brief website visit. So that's the essentially the Net Promoter Score. What we want to do with people who are 0 to 6, we want to be able to share their concerns. We want to let them know that we take their issues seriously, and that if we can't fix them because they've already happened, then at least we can help rectify that issue for others in the future. Or we can potentially address those issues now if they are present for those people today. For people who are 7 to 8, after you've asked them, is there anything that we can do that can help you get to 9 or 10, then of course you want to implement those changes for those people and for everybody if possible, and then follow up with them in a few months to see if you can actually address where they are now. They might, after you've exceeded their expectations by doing things that help them give you a 9 or 10, be much more ready to be providing you with a referral. If people already gave you a 9 and 10, well, that's great, because what you want to do then is really want to invite them to recommend you to their friends, family, and to their colleagues. Now, there's a number of different ways that we can do that. I'm going to leave it to you to come up with the different ways, but I'm going to give you some suggestions. Number one, you can ask people to do a video testimonial if you happen to have a video camera and able to film them. Sometimes even just doing an iPhone testimonial right on the spot is exactly what they're happy to do. Alternatively, you could have them write in a testimonial book, things that they felt were valuable enough to share with others, assuming that they feel very happy to recommend you. You can also ask them to share comments on Facebook, Twitter, or G+, or LinkedIn. And so using social media to recommend other people to your clinic is also very effective. Ask them to fan your Facebook page. Ask them to follow you on Twitter. Ask them to follow you on Google Plus as well, and to link up with you on LinkedIn. These are all useful things to do with these individuals, and that's one good way of asking people to submit referrals to you. You can also invite these people to events. I think it's really useful to invite people who are net promoters to events, and especially those events that you might invite people who aren't new patients just yet. So if you have any kind of seminars or any kind of lectures that you give, inviting these net promoters to come and assist and sharing their stories at these seminars is a really useful thing to do with them, and they're often more than happy to help. Also, patient parties. I know of certain clinics that do patient parties where they have hundreds of people coming to visit with them to celebrate the experiences that they've had. Definitely make sure your net promoters are on that list. Invite everybody if you can, but make sure that your net promoters are coming in and actually spreading the word at your patient parties to ensure that there's some good buzz going around. So there's always good ways to utilize the people who are already more disposed to promoting you and ensuring that they have voices and have vehicles in order to share what they think about your practice in the different channels that you help provide them with. Now, that's essentially what we want to talk about when it comes to getting referrals. I think it's important to conclude the referral aspects with the fact that everybody understands that if they ask somebody a question, would you refer us? Most people say yes. Now, the problem is, if that was the case, then we would probably get double the amount of patients we get just simply because we treated a patient. We would get one patient and we would get another patient right after. We all know that that's not in fact the case. People don't go out and refer their friends and family, typically because either they haven't been asked to do so, or the time at which they're asked is way too late and they're not necessarily as excited about things anymore. So I recommend to you to make sure that you do ask, make sure that you ask at the right time, and make sure that you ask in the right way. And I think that what I've shared with you so far should help you do just that. So that's the end of this particular lesson. Now I'm going to want to summarize the course in its entirety so that we can review with you all the elements that provide for a world-class healthcare consultation.